I am the moderator for this panel on why we need full employment now. And I want to start this panel with the person who has for decades now led the charge for full employment. I met Congressman Conyers as a young journalist back in the 1980s when he was raising this issue of full employment as an issue. And I was writing stories about the Humphrey Hawkins full employment bill, which, thanks to people like Congressman Conyers, is in fact the law of the land, not as how the founders originally intended it, or the original authors originally intended. But we are unique in the world in having a Federal Reserve, a monetary policy, which has to balance both inflation and employment. And that is due to the work of the Congressional Black Caucus and people like Congressman Conyers. So what I'd like to do to start this off is to have the Congressman open this with some remarks, and then we'll go forward with the panel discussion.
Mr. Moderator, thank you for your work. It's good to see you all here again. Some have been here before because I always have a full employment jobs panel. We've made a lot of progress, and I am anxious to hear the new ideas, the suggestions and recommendations, and the controlling issue. Oh, a lot of Detroiters coming in now. The controlling issue is where do we go from here and how do we get there? My simple answer to my own question is get more members to join us on my full employment bill, of which I have 32 members of Congress already on it. We need more, of course, and I'm just hopeful that we can be fortunate enough to increase our numbers even between now and the November election. We need full employment now. We should have had it a long time ago. The fact that the jobless rate is better, but when we talk about 5% unemployment, we're not talking about our communities across the country. They're double and triple that. And so to have Poole, Wilson, Dean Baker, Phil Harvey, good night, Ms. Razas, Stain, Garcia. This is great, and great organizations are here. I want to talk just a moment about these presentations that will be made, and I want to thank each one by one, but I want to get into this. It's so important. What I've come to believe is that full employment is a fundamental human right. Do you agree with me? Having a job in the wealthiest society in history is something that we should get to. And I want to say that President Obama has done a great job in this area because it's notwithstanding the fact that he's been under the severest attack of any president I've ever known. And I've known a lot of them. And he's withstood it with the grace and skill and staying cool, fabulous oratory, he has a great list of accomplishments. But the other good news, and I close on this point, is that Hillary Clinton has endorsed full employment as a concept, which has been taken out of the Democratic Party mandate of agenda of issues for more than 2 decades. And so we're moving in the right direction, but I've got to speed this thing up, because if you and I were working on this when you were a young man, what do you think that means as far as I'm concerned? Thank you so much, and it's so good to see all of you here for this very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get right to the panel. You all heard the good news this week, the good headlines this week about rising incomes and a lower poverty rate. But everybody in this room, and I'm looking at each one of you, and I know that you all, everybody in this room is a smart person. And so you all know that in order to get the full story, you read below the headline. And what's below the headline is a very uneven economic recovery. We have, on many of your chairs, you have this interesting illustration with the title, "Why Didn't This Little Girl Get a Seat?" I was actually looking at some unemployment statistics today. The congressman has highlighted some of them. But during the month of July, there was about 6 million job openings. However, there are more than 7 million, close to 8 million people looking for work who are unemployed, plus another 6 million people who are working part-time jobs when they want full-time jobs. In other words, there are roughly 14 million people for whom the job market is not working. Or put it this way, 8 million people who are not getting a seat, that we don't have enough seats for. And so that's why we need to have the kind of discussion that we're having, because the economy does not work for everyone until everyone has an opportunity to work. I want to start with Dean Baker, who's the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and he's written a book called Getting Back to Full Employment, A Better Bargain for Working People. And then, so if you could start, Dean, and I'd like to ask each of the panelists to keep their remarks as absolutely brief as possible so that we can have opportunity for dialogue.
Okay, I might make it even briefer since I can't find my presentation here. That's okay. It wasn't that great anyhow, so I could ad lib. That's no problem. We have a great panel here, and they'll go through a lot of the points. And the most important point that Representative Conyers already has made, and again, all of you know this: full employment. The impact of unemployment isn't felt evenly. We know that disproportionately hits African Americans, even more disproportionately African American teens. That it's a very solid rule of thumb that the unemployment rate for African Americans twice the white unemployment rate, African American teen unemployment about 6 times. So this is a really big deal, as you know. So what I want to do is it's okay, I could do without. They weren't that great anyhow. What I want to do is make a little bit of a nerdy point, because we're in a situation, this will sound perverse to you, we have the Federal Reserve Board actually set on trying to keep people from getting jobs. And if that sounds strange to you, if we had members of the Fed, and they aren't all in this boat, but if we had those who want to keep people from getting jobs, what they say, we're concerned about inflation. Inflation's going to get out of control. The economy's growing too fast. If we keep creating jobs at the rate we're going to do that, the rate we're doing it, then we'll see big upward pressure on wages, and that's going to lead to spiraling inflation, and that would be really bad news. Okay, that's what they would say. And there's a lot of people at the Federal Reserve Board who are saying that. Now, there's some good ones who are saying the opposite. I'll just mention a couple. Lyle Brainerd, as appointed by President Obama, she's saying the opposite. Also, to date at least, the chair, Janet Yellen, has been saying the opposite. So, this is an ongoing battle. But the point, being a nerdy economist, the point I make in arguing with these people is, well, wait a second, we're really far from that point where we have to worry. So I'll grant, somewhere, we could have a really, really tight labor market and, wages are soaring and, that could be, but we're really far from that. Now, first thing they say is, well, if you look at the unemployment rate, it's 4.9%. It's pretty low, certainly lower than when President Obama came into office, lower than where it's been most of the last 4 decades. So you go, okay, well, that doesn't look too bad. I'd like it to be much lower. We got 4% year-round average in 2000. Good place to start. Maybe we could do better than that, but good place to start. But in any case, 4.9 isn't particularly high. Points I make, okay, first off, if we look at the employment rate rather than the unemployment rate, what percentage of the population is employed? Well, we find that's still way below the pre-recession level. Okay, so what's happened is we've had a lot of people drop out of the labor force. And let me point out, we have ways for controlling for this. We know we're getting older. I'm getting older. All of us here are getting older. Baby boomers are dropping out of the labor force, some of them because they're retiring. That's great. Okay, but if we look at prime-age workers, people 25 to 54, employment among that group of people is down by more than 2 percentage points from its pre-recession level. Okay, that's something that's very hard to explain in the sense that these people didn't just decide to retire. They didn't decide they don't need to work. What happened, and we have a lot of evidence on this one, people see that they can't get a job, they stop looking. That's not surprising. And when they stop looking, they aren't counted as being unemployed. So this 4.9% measure, and people always say, well, are you supporting Donald Trump? No, made great progress. But the point is that 4.9% measure still is consistent with having a very long way to go before we should be satisfied, and that's because we have a lot of people that aren't counted as being unemployed simply because they've dropped out of the labor force. And I'll just say a little more about this because there's some economists, they say crazy things. There's some serious economists, well-credentialed economists, you could decide whether they're serious or not. They're saying these people dropped out of the labor force, and they're referring to men here, because they're playing video games and watching internet porn. And you go, okay, come on, guys. And we looked at this because, I don't know what they're doing, but that's not what we looked at. We looked at who's left the labor force. It's not just men. It's women, actually. If you look at less educated women, actually a higher percent of them dropped out of the labor force than the men. So maybe they're looking at porn and, it gets silly, in other words. So there is not a story there. I'll just make a couple other points. Congressman Conyers already alluded to this. If you look at people who are working part-time who want full-time employment, so a lot of people do that voluntarily, and that's actually a great thing. One of the benefits of Obamacare. That's not my dream. I know Representative Conyers is a big promoter of single-payer, as am I, but we didn't get it. But we did get, I think, a big victory with Obamacare, and one of the things is a lot of people are able to work part-time because they don't need insurance through their job. Great thing. But the number of people who are working involuntarily part-time, people who say they want full-time employment, that's closer to recession levels. Okay, so it's, again, give President Obama credit, way down from when he took office in 2009, but it's still much closer to what you'd see in a recession than a period of full employment. Okay, the last point I'll make is just in a similar vein. In a good labor market, people feel confident of their employment opportunities. And one way we see that is that a lot of people are prepared. They have a job they hate or it's not paying them enough money, whatever. They're prepared to quit with the idea that, take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they'll get another job. So we have a measure for this. We look at what share of unemployment is due to people who voluntarily quit their job. Here, too, we have a level of unemployment due to quitters, people voluntarily quit, that's closer to what you see in a recession than what you would see when we're near full employment. So just to sort of conclude here, what I'd say is that, if you look at the numbers carefully, we have these people running around 4.9% unemployment. Again, way better than where we were, when President Obama took office. That's still very far from where we need to be, and the data simply doesn't support the case that we're near full employment. So we have a long way to go, good progress, but we still have a long way to go. Thanks.
The person who's provided us with this, what I think is a very powerful visual, is Mr. Phil Harvey. He's the professor at Rutgers Law School, and he's the author of the book, Securing the Right to Employment, Social Welfare Policy and the unemployed in the United States. Mr. Harvey.
Hi, Phil.
I know time is short, so I'm going to show you only 3 slides to make a quick explanation of what, in my opinion, is necessary to achieve full employment. And I put the slides on this so that you don't have to look over there while I'm standing over here talking. That would be disconcerting. And I begin with the slide of the game of musical chairs and ask you to take a look at it. I don't think you need that. I've handed out copies of this. Okay, well, there it is if you want to look at it. Ask yourself, why is it that this little girl doesn't have a seat? Is it because she's the smallest or the slowest? Because other girls and boys ganged up on her? Didn't she understand a good strategy? You know, how you stop and pause and rush and bump in order to get a chair? Or didn't she try hard enough? Well, no. None of those are the reason that she doesn't have a seat. The reason she doesn't have a seat is there aren't enough chairs. And if there were enough chairs, none of those factors would prevent her from sitting down. This is a very important distinction because the labor market works exactly the same way. The reason people are unemployed is because there aren't enough jobs to go around, and that's not just true during a recession. It's true at the top of the business cycle when the economy is booming. Okay? The factors that I have mentioned and others like them are important, but what they determine is who is unemployed. They don't create the unemployment, they just distribute it. And we know from experience they distribute it in ways so that anybody with any kind of disadvantage is more likely to end up unemployed than anybody without that disadvantage. Okay? Now, the second slide that I want to show you, that's the third. Oh, I don't know what happened to the second. Well, it's on the back of the piece of paper anyway. This is the same picture as musical chairs. It's just a little harder to capture the essence of it. It tells us how many jobs employers had open and available for filling on a monthly basis from December of 2000 until the present. And that's the area under the bottom line, the little dotted area. Those are job openings. The area above that line, up to the red line, is official unemployment in excess of job openings. Those are the people who are greater in number than the available jobs. Above that are involuntary part-time workers, people who have part-time jobs but want full-time work. And above that are people who want jobs but are not counted as unemployed because they are not looking for work actively enough to qualify as unemployed when the government collects the data for the survey reporting unemployment. And I refer to the difference between the number of jobs available and the number of job wanters in the economy as the job gap. And the extent or size of the unemployment problem is entirely a function of the size of that job gap. And if you look at the figure, you'll see, well, it grew enormously in the middle of this time period. That was the Great Recession. Isaiah mentioned what the comparative numbers were in August, but at the depth of the Great Recession, there were 2.4 million job openings that employers were seeking to fill, 14.5 officially unemployed workers, 9.1 million involuntary part-time workers, and 6.6 million job wanters who were not counted as unemployed, totaling 30.2 million people who wanted work, struggling to find jobs among the 2.4 million that were available. So the job gap in the depth of a recession is huge. But it's very important to understand that even at the top of the business cycle, when, as Dean pointed out, the Federal Reserve is actually trying to prevent the unemployment rate from going lower because of reasonable concerns about inflation, there's still a large job gap. in December of 2000, when the unemployment rate was 3.9% and had averaged 4% for over a year leading up to that point. This was the end of the dot-com boom. The economy was booming. But still, at that point in time, there were 4.9 million job openings, 5.6 million officially unemployed workers, 3.2 million involuntary part-time workers, and 4.2 million job wanters not counted as unemployed, for a total number of job wanters of 13 million compared to 4.9 available jobs, a job gap of 8.2 million jobs that we needed to provide work for everyone that we did not have, even though the unemployment rate was 3.9%. The best available data that we have, and this is a combination of really good data since December of 2000, when this time series begins, and estimates prior to that, but reasonably good estimates, suggest that there have been only 5 years in the past 93 when there were more jobs available on average than job seekers, officially unemployed job seekers. 2 of those years were in the 1920s, and the other 3 were the last 3 years of World War II, when the unemployment rate averaged 1.7%. What all 5 of those years have in common, years when there were enough jobs, is that the unemployment rate was between 1 and 2%. If the unemployment rate is above that level, we can be almost certain that there are not enough jobs to go around. Okay? And so in order to achieve full employment, in order to make sure that every child gets a seat, every job seeker gets a job, it has to be based on a strategy capable of closing the economy's job gap. And if the strategy you're pursuing is not capable of closing the economy's job gap, well, it's just not a full employment strategy. It may be a good strategy for some intermediate goal, but it's not a full employment strategy. And the last thing I'll say is that we're fortunate that Representative Conyers has filed a bill that actually is designed to achieve full employment, that actually is designed to provide work for everybody who wants it at decent wages, and to do it without encountering the problems of inflation that the strategies we have historically depended upon to try and boost employment depend upon. The secret lies in differences in the way in which the goal of full employment is achieved under Representative Conyers' legislation, but that's a topic for another day. The topic for today is why we need full employment, and at least my contribution to that is, well, what is the goal that we need to get to? And the goal to keep in mind is every child gets a seat, every job wanter gets a job. Thank you.
All right. Let's continue to nerd out with one of my favorite nerds, Valerie Wilson. She's over at the Economic Policy Institute, which is one of the most vital source statistics about what's going on in the economy, and Ms. Wilson is in charge of the program on race, ethnicity, and the economy.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to speak from here. Is this on? It's on? Okay. So Dean and Phil have done a really great job of laying out what the labor market looks like on the employment or unemployment side. What I would like to spend a few moments reiterating is that in addition to the employment benefits and everyone who wants and is able to be employed can find a job, there are also wage or earnings benefits associated with full employment as well. I also want to make the point that, it's interesting that Congressman Conyers has been working on this issue, as he said, for decades. And the fact that year after year we can have this panel here, I don't know for certain, but I would say it's probably titled something similar or same as it is this year. I think that really points to the fact that full employment for years has been more of an aspiration than an achievement. The other point I think is important to note on that is that it's not exclusively a black issue. And we've already heard that, You know, it's about increasing employment. Everyone who wants a job can get a job. That's not exclusively an African American issue, but full employment does have important significance for African Americans, the least of which is not the earnings or income benefits. So, just to throw something out there, I've estimated that, for example, if we were to cut the unemployment rate in half, African American hourly wages would grow about 8%. That's compared to growth of about half that for whites. So we find that we have stronger wage growth when we have full employment. Not only do hourly wages grow faster, but we also find that there's a greater increase in hours worked. So people make more per hour. They're able to work more hours. So all those people who were working part-time but wanted to work full-time are able to find full-time work. This translates into increased household income. So you actually see incomes starting to rise. And then what effect does that have? That improves living standards. So then we start to see the poverty rate come down. So, you know, it starts with everyone having access to a job, but the fact that we have a tighter labor market actually shifts the balance of power in favor of workers. It's increased bargaining power for workers that allows wages to increase. It actually raises the cost of discrimination that, you know, has been one of the factors behind that persistent 2-to-1 black-white unemployment rate ratio gap. It, you know, raises the cost of discrimination, and, you know, it improves living standards on the tail end of that. And while we're nowhere near full employment now, I don't think any of us would say that we are, you know, finally at a full employment economy. Things are moving in the right direction. I think that this week, when the new census numbers on income and poverty came out, it sort of gave us a glimpse or an early look at where we could get to if we were able to get to full employment and stay there. So I'm sure you've all probably heard by now, between 2014 and 15, the median household income increased by more than it had in many years, 5%. That, you know, has been unheard of for years. I think another important factor in that is that the largest household income growth, or the fastest household income growth, I should say, happened at the lower end of the income distribution. So it actually happened among people in the bottom 10%, bottom 20%, you know, anyone below the median mark. But in addition to that, when we look on the earnings side, we found that the earnings of African American and Latino workers grew faster over that last year than did white workers. Now, again, that's to sort of give a glimpse of what full employment can do. Household incomes have not returned to where they were in 2007, much less in 2000, the last time we were anywhere close to full employment. And despite the faster growth among communities of color, we still have income, earnings, and unemployment gaps. So this is by no means to say that it wipes out every problem of inequality, but it does move us further, you know, down the path of beginning to address those. I'd much rather address a 2-to-1 gap when we're talking about 4% and 2% than when we're talking about 6% and 12%. So, you know, full employment has benefits not only on the employment side, but it has a material impact on families and households' well-being, because it also translates into wage and income growth and reduction in poverty.
Thank you very much. Part of the challenge is making sure that the Federal Reserve, as Dean Baker said earlier, does not short-circuit the movement toward full employment. And a few weeks ago, when the members of the Federal Reserve were gathered at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, I believe it was, there was an unusual meeting between members of the Federal Reserve and activists who were brought together under what's called the Fed Up campaign. And the Fed Up campaign is a group of people who have worked to pressure the Federal Reserve to make sure that they do not take actions that slow down the economy before everyone has had a chance to get on the economic train as it moves forward. So Connie Raza is here to talk a bit about that. She's the Director of Strategic Research at the Center for Popular Democracy.
I'm going to sit here too. Hi, I'm Connie Raza. I got a promotion since last year, and I'm the Director of Campaigns now at the Center for Popular Democracy. And we are a network of 43 grassroots organizations in 30 states. These organizations work for progressive change in cities and states across the country on things like minimum wage and paid sick days and fair scheduling practices, over-policing, and investments in our communities. And one of the things that our affiliate organizations realized was as we're working to raise the floor, the Federal Reserve actually is able to create an environment in which the floors are the best we can hope for, that the bargaining power of workers is curtailed by them not prioritizing ensuring a full employment economy. And so members from around the country have taken on this Fed Up campaign as part of a coalition with many of our economist friends as well as other organizations across the country. And what I'll do today is just a quick overview of the arc of that campaign. As Isaiah was saying, the Fed Up campaign is a national campaign for full employment, rising wages, and a more accountable Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has enormous power over our ability to achieve higher wages, fairer working conditions, and better jobs overall, because in an economy where there are too many workers for each job, it is very hard for workers to bargain for, to have the bargaining power to create working conditions that would be considered good. CPD was uniquely positioned because our partners are in, as I said, 30 states, but notably, right, each of the 12 Federal Reserve regions. And we have partners in many of the headquarter cities of the Federal Reserve regions. And so we began paying attention to the Federal Reserve because it's, with the stalemate in Congress, the most important economic policy maker in the U.S. right now. And so we took it on, even though it seemed like too technocratic to influence and too esoteric for community members to get excited about. The first action was August 2014, where we went to Jackson Hole, and we had 10 members in Jackson Hole that year, and were able to change the narrative around that conference from being about the ascendancy of hawks who wanted to raise interest rates immediately to being about the ways in which the current economy was not serving the people of the country, that we were still not at a full employment economy, that as employment rates were gaining, they weren't gaining in African American communities in particular, and also Latino communities. In the 2 years since, the Fed Up campaign has become a growing force in the conversation, largely due to the comprehensive nature of our grassroots activism and our strong economic allies, or economisty allies. I don't know what the right adjective is for that. But the two key components of the demands have been to keep interest rates low to allow us to get to a full employment economy and to improve the transparency and diversity of the Federal Reserve. And so last year we released a few reports precisely about the diversity of the Federal Reserve Board and the impacts of the Federal Reserve policies on African American communities in particular. In addition, we supported Representative Conyers in introducing his full employment bill last year. And then we built upon that work and expanded from engaging directly with Fed decision makers to holding Fed officials accountable with our other congressional allies. And so we've been at the Humphrey Hawkins hearings, and have managed, with the help of key Congress members, to move Yellen and the Fed significantly on issues of monetary policy and race. And so for the first time this summer, Janet Yellen made an unprecedented acknowledgement about the Fed's diversity problem and that the Fed has a role to play in addressing racial disparities. And so this year, we're continuing to move forward. As Representative Conyers mentioned, for the first time since 1988, full employment is in the Democratic platform. And for the first time since 1984, Fed reform is in the Democratic platform. And so coming off of 120 people going to Jackson Hole, which is usually a very rarefied opportunity for economists to talk among themselves about where the economy is going. We are moving to create more of a people's Fed, so a Federal Reserve that is more transparent and a Federal Reserve that represents the diversity of the country, both in terms of the sectors that are represented and in terms of race and gender diversity.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you've done on that issue. The fight for full employment, I sort of traced it back to the 1980s. It goes way before that, in fact. And if you, anyone who knows the work of people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. know that full employment was a critical cornerstone of his economic agenda, and as it was for the entire civil rights movement. One of the people well-positioned to really speak to that and draw the connections between the civil rights fight of the past and the economic fight of the present is David Stein, who's at the Department of History and African American Studies at UCLA.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be on this panel and to be speaking before all of you at this conference. So, the urgency of accelerating pressure can best be understood against the background of past defeats. This was the insight that A. Philip Randolph, the lead organizer of the March on Washington, shared with Congress's Committee on Employment and Manpower just a month before the march. And this insight also brings us together today. Around the time of the march, in the summer of 1963, Randolph and the other lead organizer, Bayard Rustin, scribbled out potential slogans that they wanted the 250,000 marchers to hold during the event. Civil rights plus full employment equals freedom, Randolph suggested. Such a sign reveals a core feature of the civil rights movement's efforts to bring Keynesianism across the color line. The struggle for the ballot conjoined with the struggle over Congress's power of the purse. It cannot be overstated that from its earliest days, challenging the problem of unemployment was central to the march. As an early title for the march was, quote, "The Emancipation March for Jobs." As the march's initial organizing manual explained, this, quote, "The civil rights demands include effective civil rights legislation, desegregation of the nation's schools, an end to police brutality, while the jobs demands include a federal public works program to provide jobs for all the unemployed, a federal Fair Employment Practices Act to bar job discrimination, broadening the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act to include the uncovered areas of employment where Negroes and other minorities work at slave wages, and an establishment of a national minimum wage of not less than $2 per hour, effectively $15.73 today. In the build-up to the march, Randolph clarified the importance of the jobs crisis. Quote, "Not only are Negro workers looking for jobs they cannot find, but they find jobs they cannot perform because of a lack of skills and training due largely to racial barriers to apprenticeship training courses." Randolph's speech at the march highlighted this too. quote, "We want a Fair Employment Practices Act, but what good will it do if profit-geared automation destroys the jobs of millions of workers, black and white?" he asked the audience. Nevertheless, for both Congress and President Kennedy, the jobs demands were overlooked. In a meeting with the march's leaders just after the event to discuss recently introduced civil rights legislation, when Randolph pressed Kennedy about automation and joblessness, Kennedy skirted the issue, partly because he had already agreed to manage aggregate demand with tax reductions, not jobs programs, a practice that John Kenneth Galbraith would refer to as reactionary Keynesianism. But unemployment at the time was 5.7% across the board and 10.7% for black workers. Unemployment for workers of color had been above 10% since the 1957 through 58 recession. Kennedy's tax policies, in short, were inadequate to ameliorate this crisis. Although the march is remembered, as it should be, as a tremendous success, when looked at from the perspective of its central demand, a guaranteed job for all, this key goal went unachieved. But Randolph and Rustin and their milieu did not simply go home after their efforts were stymied. Instead, they recalibrated their strategy. One thing they learned was that it was not enough to protest with signs in one hand. Instead, they needed signs in one hand and model legislation in the other. Rustin and Randolph then began collaborating with economist and lawyer Leon Kaiserling, one of the era's most persistent advocates of full employment. Together, they crafted the Freedom Budget for All Americans in order to reinvigorate the U.S. social welfare state. However, this effort too went unachieved. They were stymied by President Johnson's decision, guided by Wilbur Mills, the powerful chair of the Ways and Means Committee, to continue to cut taxes to stimulate demand. Likewise, the Freedom Budget campaign missed its brief window between 1964 and 66, when conceivably a Bobby Kennedy, Jacob Javits-sponsored bill might have had a chance in Congress. The story of that struggle, which is too long to get into here, laid the basis for the subsequent decades' efforts. In the 1970s, Coretta Scott King then took the baton from Randolph Rustin and her late husband. She became the leading figure in the struggle for guaranteed jobs. In the 2 decades after her husband's death, Scott King devoted herself to achieving governmental guarantees to employment and disentangling violence from the economy. For her, this was the continuation of the civil rights movement. In May 1974, with unemployment having remained above 5% since January and prime interest rates soaring above 9%, the struggle for full employment achieved an even greater salience across racial lines. Scott King then began collaborating with other key civil rights and labor leaders to forge the Full Employment Action Council and the National Committee for Full Employment. Presciently, when Scott King had written the initial ask to elicit support for the coalition, the unemployment rate was 5.1%. But by the time the coalition was making headway in January 1975, unemployment had jumped to 8%, with no signs of slowing down. For Scott King, she saw her mission as eliminating what she described as all forms of violence, not only the criminal kinds of violence, but institutionalized violence. As she explained, quote, "Any form of deprivation is a form of violence. Starving a child is a form of violence. Depriving a person of a job is a form of violence." When asked about what sectors should be prioritized for guaranteed jobs programs, Scott King noted that, quote, "This nation has never honestly dealt with the question of a peacetime economy and what it means in terms of the development within the country. We've had a much greater employment during times when we've been engaged in war." As she argued, quote, "There are not enough hospitals and there is not enough medical care provided for people. There are not enough public schools. There are not enough teacher aides, nursing aides, and that kind of thing. If we built more hospitals, we could put a lot of people to work building hospitals for the sick people. These would be areas of human needs." In contrast to Scott King, leading figures like Alan Greenspan, at the time a member of President Ford's Council of Economic Advisors, announced in June 1975 that, quote, "The recession, for all practical purposes, is over." As if responding to Greenspan directly, 8 months later, in testimony before the Joint Economic Committee, Scott King noted, quote, "We are not actually talking about a recovery from high levels of unemployment, but an acceptance of high unemployment as a permanent part of American life." Scott King emphasized that for black people, quote, "The economic policies and actions of the past few years have been nothing less than a frontal assault on all the gains and victories of the 1960s. She asked the members of Congress, quote, "What good is the promise of fair employment when there is no employment?" As she explained, accepting unemployment to control inflation amounts to choosing the people at the very bottom of the economic pyramid to bear the entire economic burden. In the so-called war against inflation, America's 10 million unemployed have been the administration's conscript army. Scott King and her coalition's efforts went partly achieved. They provided the activist energy behind the Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment Act. As Scott King announced after its passage, but with many of its most forceful demands removed, quote, "Humphrey Hawkins is the vital first step. All of the gains of the movement my husband led in the 50s and 60s were not accomplished at once." So she announced, "We will be back in Washington year after year after year until there is full employment." This is the legacy we are walking in today. As we honor the 50th anniversaries of the Civil Rights Movement, the unfinished tasks of Coretta Scott King compel questions of what was won and what remains to be achieved. When such struggles occur, perhaps the efforts of prior organizers, rather than being cast as failure, will then resemble preparation.
We're down to our last two panelists. Getting to full employment, of course, is a shared responsibility of both the public sector, government, and the private sector. So we're going to first have the policy director of the National Job Corps Association speak. I am going to the sin of the moderator is to mangle the name of the panelists. And I'm going to do even worse. I'm not even going to try to mangle it. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself with egg all over my face.
Well, thank you. Thank
So
you.
welcome.
My name is Anand Vimalacheri, so no, I can barely say my name, so I don't hold that against you at all. Let me just get this set up. Thank you, first of all, for inviting us to participate in this presentation. Nope, that's not right. Sorry, it's been a long time since I used a PC, and I forget. Let's go right over here. Oh, perfect. That's me. It's nothing to do with you. All right, there we go. So I'm going to try and move through this. I think I want to tell a story that I don't think is unfamiliar to most folks in this room, but it's particularly focusing on a specific vulnerable population and how the labor market affects the current labor market is affecting them and what they're seeing and experiencing in the labor market. And I work for the National Job Corps Association. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Job Corps, it is the largest national intervention for opportunity youth. And that's youth who are 16 to 24 years old, who are economically disadvantaged, out of school and out of work, and we'll get into that in a second. Job Corps was created, a little bit of the history we just heard, it was created out of the war on poverty, which came directly out of Dr. King's economic agenda and the civil rights movement. And it was created through the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, along with Head Start, the VISTA program, the adult basic education grants. And today, 50 years later now, the program still exists. It's been, survived through champions like Congressman Conyers in Congress, and it's continued to be successful. And today there are 126 centers all over the country, mostly residential centers. There's one in every state now, including in the district and in Puerto Rico. And altogether, they serve about 50,000 youth each year. And the centers, for those who are unaware, they provide remedial academics. So you can get your high school diploma, you can get a high school equivalency there, career technical education in over 100 occupations that range from nursing to IT to welding and union construction trades to new things like solar panel installation. In addition to a lot of other comprehensive, we try to serve the youth comprehensively to address all their needs. So in addition to those basics of education, there's mental health counseling, there's mentoring, there's civic leadership development. A lot of the things that actually, when you talk to the youth in exit interviews, these are the things they point to as being the most impactful part of their stay and contributing to their success. And of course, the point of the program, the name is Job Corps, is to get them a job, to help them start a career. So there's also job placement and support services. So that population I was talking about, the population the Job Corps served, is our opportunity youth. We call them opportunity youth. They used to be called at-risk youth or at-promise youth or disconnected youth, but all of that means 16 to 24-year-olds in our country who are neither employed nor in school. And research has suggested that ignoring this population costs taxpayers almost $100 billion annually in terms of both the services they consume as well as lost revenue from taxes. And this is an incredibly diverse population. We have one term for it, but these youth fall into this category for different reasons. Some of them may be dropouts, but a substantial portion of them are actually high school graduates who are just neither prepared to succeed in college nor prepared to enter the workforce. Many of them may be homeless or aging out of the foster care system. They may be single parents or involved with the court system. There's a lot of things that drive youth into this population. And academically, they may be students, Job Corps there's students who enter our program who are functionally illiterate, and then there's also others who circumstances in their life led them off track. It may be that a parent fell ill and they had to become the sole breadwinner for the family and left school for that reason. But with some assistance through a program like ours, there have been students who've enrolled in Harvard. So there's a wide range of students that fall in this population. Racially, African American youth tend to be disconnected from both school and employment at this age range more so than the general population. They're almost twice as likely to at least African American males, to fall into this group, and as well as to have a child at that age, which makes the cost of not addressing this population, not working with this population, doubly expensive, than that $93 billion figure that I mentioned. This is just quickly, and I'll get back to this later, but the investment in programs that deal with this population at the federal level, Job Corps, Youth Build, and others like that, has over the last two administrations steadily declined. We've reduced that investment even though the population has grown. Although this chart does not include the bump that came from the American Recovery Act during the stimulus bill, which was something that certainly helped enormously. But getting into the experience of these youth in the labor market, one of the things I wanted to share is this infographic that comes from a report the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce did, that looking at the job creation since the recovery, 99% of the jobs, 11.5 of 11.6 million jobs that were created since the recovery, went to those who had some post-secondary education. And only 80,000 of those jobs went to individuals who had a high school diploma or less. And beyond that, we know that from reporting around the time of the recession that the long-term unemployed was a significant problem. If you hadn't worked for a long time, if you weren't currently working, it was much harder to get a job. Employers preferred those who were already employed. And so these are two things now that these youth who already face so many challenges, the labor market is placing additional premiums on education and current job experience, the two things that this population, by definition, lacks. And so they're facing an even more challenging labor market. One of the policy initiatives that's been talked about or being pushed to respond to this on the education side are free college programs. Of course, President Obama has his America's College Promise, which seeks to provide 2 years of community college education for free, and then Hillary Clinton in her campaign, they've promoted the idea of free public college for middle-class families, those with less than $125,000 in income. And these are absolutely, obviously, with impactful initiatives. The one thing I would suggest is they're not necessarily enough for this population. And the reason being, as you'll see on this chart, that the population I'm talking about, opportunity youth, particularly those who may not have completed their high school education, but even the substantial portion that have, often when they enter college get tracked into remedial education. And remedial education is kind of a black hole for college completion. The vast majority of these students will never complete a credential, will never complete a degree. And, you know, obviously that's a significant problem. So we track these students into just sending them to college. If they get tracked in remedial education, we're not necessarily addressing the situation that they're facing, the challenges that they bring to the table. Job Corps actually helps bridge that gap. We are remarkably successful at remedial education, whereas, you know, in just a year in the program, students on average make learning gains of 2 school years, or two grade levels. And whereas 13% of remedial students in community colleges might earn a certificate in a year and a half, over 70% of Job Corps students do the same in a year. So we're very successful with this population, in part because we're not just providing the academics, we're providing all the other support services that are so critical to their success, dealing with the situations of are they a single parent? Is their family relying on them for income? Dealing with the other circumstances of their lives. In addition to other things like contextualized learning, wrap it up, okay, and support services. So a lot of community colleges are recognizing this and working with their Job Corps centers to create partnerships where they'll send their remedial students to Job Corps to help them, you know, go further along. Again, the chart about, even though this is needed, as we look into investing more in colleges and in community colleges, we should also be looking at investing more in these programs that help bridge the gap so these students can be successful in those programs. The last piece I'd just like to tie together with the conversation on full employment, going back to this, the infographic about the 99% of students, or the 99% of jobs that went to those with post-secondary education. Notice this doesn't say that those jobs actually required post-secondary education. These jobs just went to individuals with post-secondary education. One of the factors, or one of the things coming out of our current labor market, is that some economists have looked at the data and workers are over-skilled for the jobs that they actually have. And of course, we all saw reporting after the recession about how those with bachelor's degrees coming out of college couldn't find jobs and were entering, you know, jobs that this population or other populations might otherwise have taken. So the lack of full employment, the lack of opportunities in the labor market creates additional pressures, particularly on those at the bottom of the labor market, because now we're requiring more of them. Now, whereas a high school education would have been sufficient previously, now we have to invest in post-secondary education just for them to even, you know, get in the door and be able to compete. But that's my spiel.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker, this event was made possible by by Amazon, and Juan Garcia is the global leader for career advancement at Amazon. And if you could just make a brief comment about Amazon and the work that your stake in this.
Sure, glad to. Congressman Connors, it's an honor to meet you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's been a pleasure to hear from these experts in academia and in think tank world. I thought a brief perspective from the world of industry, specifically a little scrappy upstart called Amazon that you may have heard of, and a program we're initiating, we've been at it for a couple years, that I think has significant implications for the challenge of full economy, full employment, and an invitation to take to businesses and companies in your district and your hometowns for Amazon at no charge to come and open source it and show those companies what's worked for Amazon, and we'll set it up for you. I'm going to skip through the slides and just show you a quick video to introduce this program. We call it Career Choice. And I think a colleague of ours named Sherry can tell you about it in the quickest way possible. I wonder if we have some sound.
That sounds like a sound.
My name is Sherry. I work at Phoenix 5 in the shipping outbound department, and I really like it here. I'm a single mother of 8, and it's 6 boys and 2 girls. You know, they're the ones that keep me strong. Family time together is amazing.
My mom is courageous, she's warm, she's loving, she's happy, she's smart, she's extremely funny, she's superwoman. I've been working for Amazon for 2.5 years. It's a very fun, positive environment.
I love working with Sherry. She is actually one of our strongest associates in outbound. She's kind of the jack of all trades, and I can personally attest to just her big heart.
The career I'm studying for is the commercial driver's license. The classes are all right here at Amazon. I found out about that through the Career Choice program. And once the opportunity came about, I grabbed at it because it was something I was looking to do for a while.
It is a magnificent benefit where associates could utilize Career Choice program to pay for some of their tuition, essentially 95%.
That's a huge benefit for me because I couldn't afford a lump sum of money right out of pocket. So to have them to prepay for the program, it helped me out a lot.
You can continue to grow beyond Amazon or with Amazon. So it's really encouraging them to continue their education.
If it wasn't for this program, I don't think that she would be as driven to go back to school right now. It's uplifted her a whole lot.
Amazon has helped me a lot. They care about my other options and goals in life. I can see myself in this big 18-wheeler driving through cities and enjoying every moment of it. It's going to be sort of like a vacation within a job. I'm really doing this for my family. My children, they look up to me. I want them to be able to see that you have to strive for what you want in life. So I'm giving this all I got.
So in a nutshell, I'll make it very, very quick. The way the Career Choice program works is this. Many, many companies across America are offering tuition assistance programs. Most of them tend to be targeted at management, white-collar workers. It tends to double as a retention device, MBAs, graduate degrees, et cetera. Ours is targeted exclusively at our hourly workforce, what we call our associates. And a couple elements that make the program particularly peculiar. As you heard Sherry say, we learned early on that asking people to front tuition, even if it was fully compensated, was a showstopper for a lot of folks. So we pay everything up front. Number two, we like to say we do the homework in advance. So what we've done is partner with entities like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor, local workforce entities, and per region, per node, as you call it, we offer courses of study in those roles that will lead to greater paying opportunities within that community. So if you're from South Texas, like I'm from, in that area, we offer things like welding, where the refinery industry is blowing up and there's all kinds of opportunities. In the Pacific Northwest, near Amazon's headquarters, it might be aircraft maintenance. Other pockets of the country, it might be commercial driver's license, like Sherry had. The other thing that became very clear to us is that asking people to work a full shift and then maybe go pick up a child from daycare and then go catch soccer practice for their other child and then somehow to get across town to a community college or a vocational training center and park and get to class is not realistic. So we brought the colleges to our buildings. As you might have seen in the video, in all our new fulfillment centers, as we call them, we have dedicated career choice classrooms. We schedule the classes around the work shift, either before or after. We've partnered with those entities, so class gets done right there, minimizing the inertia. Now the last piece, people might say, hey, this is counterintuitive. You're training people to leave. You're training people to move on to another role. I know it's counterintuitive, but that's exactly right. What we find is that we bring in folks, many will spend a career with us, their Amazon family. For others, it's one stop on their personal and professional journey. And if we can help facilitate that dream, that move on to their next stop, we want to do so. The old days, when our fathers in those days might have spent an entire career with a single company and 40, 50 years and get a watch at the end, the demographers tell us that doesn't really happen anymore. In fact, for these millennials, it's more likely they'll have a minimum of 6 to 8 stops in the course of their career. We want to help facilitate that. And we're so committed to this, that Jeff Bezos, the leader of Amazon, has given my team and myself the following charge and mandate. Go to every company in America with the hourly workforce and tell them if they're interested in learning what this program has done for Amazon in terms of a better recruit, in terms of enhanced engagement, in terms of decreased retention, and then leading people on to the next step in their personal and professional journey with a great experience, they're Amazonian customers for life, that we want to help you set it up. There's no cost, there's no catch. We'll come to you and share our playbook with you for how we set up career choice. I'll leave you with my contact information. We'll skip through these slides. I've swapped info with the congressman. Reach me here for more information. We want to come and provide this opportunity for people in your hometown and your district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, the flyer says we have to leave at 4:15. However, do we have a couple of moments to have questions? I'm told. Aha, okay. So we have a couple of brief questions from the audience that we were able to take, and I'm told that there will be a discussion, a brief presentation on the Detroit water crisis in Flint, Michigan, immediately after this. The gentleman over here.
I'm Ken McCraley. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm in the construction industry, and I own a construction-related company that hires or has about 30 employees. 95% of them is African Americans. And what I see is legislation that comes down, at least around the construction industry, that has to do with highway and bridge work, because obviously the Department of Transportation has a lot of money. And then what happens is they try to make it a Jobs Act as well. So they hire a lot of minorities and in those jobs who don't qualify. But what happens is the union or the municipality ends up changing the qualification just to get those folks in, and then those jobs are gone. And so that's one of the, the jobs that we, the stimulus that we put together, we end up losing them. And then the other thing is private industry. The gentleman from Amazon, you bring up good points, but just in our particular Minneapolis area, there's a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, right? And those are the folks who are the movers and shakers who can buy a half a city block and employ folks. But what happens is we don't know what their employment goals are, right? And what can happen is whatever legislature can actually come up with and say, if we put $1 of federal funds in there, we want to know what you hire.
I really don't want to interrupt you, but can you just quickly get to the question?
The question, the question is this, right? Is when we're creating these job programs, we really have to look at how long those folks are being hired for. That's never looked at. It's that our success is we hired XYZ minority and women contractors or people, but you look down the line and no one looks 2 years, 5 years. Those folks aren't working at those jobs. We're in another recession. They're the first to go.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to talk about how we address that issue of longevity and making sure that we're putting people in a permanent place in the street?
If we view job programs as training programs and judge their success by what happens to the participants after they leave the program, we are not going to have any effect on the unemployment problem. If the problem is a lack of jobs, a job gap, job programs have to be conceived not as a training program to move people into jobs because they don't have what it takes, but as a means of creating the jobs to fill the job gap. And they have to be jobs that persist. That doesn't mean that they have to be permanent jobs for the individuals who occupy them, but the positions have to be permanent so that in terms of the people who cycle through them, there will always be the additional employment opportunities created. They can't go away. It's not a temporary fix. It's the permanent need to fill the job gap that's got to drive the program.
Well, since you've got the
Thanks.
mic, but be real brief.
I'll
I
be
want to
real.
see if I can squeeze in.
Okay. I'm just gonna simply footnotes. Full employment with benefits you need to talk about, and right to work is very confusing because right now, for example, in Virginia we have to vote no on that amendment because right to work often references anti-union stuff, right to work for less. And Frank, and I just wanted to say that as a union president or my career in the union, that we also have done similar programs to what Amazon has done within the union context.
Okay. Hand that mic to the person behind you. Anyone want to comment from the panel? Okay.
The only thing, can I just say?
Sure.
I mean, the only thing I would say is full employment with benefits, right? And I think that full employment means that workers will be in a better position to bargain for better conditions, and that can go beyond even the traditional benefits that we think about, so.
I'll just throw a quick line. We should never let them get away with right to work. What they're talking about is denying freedom of contract.
And historically, it was progressives that we should blame for letting conservatives steal the slogan. The right to work slogan was a slogan promoted by FDR as a means of achieving what we now call full employment. Progressives let the use of the term lapse, and conservatives says, oh, goody, we'll take it over, and they didn't. We let them get away with it. We got to take it back from them.
Okay. Please be brief.
I came in the back end of the conversation, so I just want to know, like, what are the keys to succeeding on Amazon? I did recently started an open an
just
account.
speak directly into the mic.
I did recently open an account, and a seller's account, and I started on professional, but then I wasn't getting a lot of traffic, so I downgraded to the individual subscription. So I just want to know, what is the key in succeeding on Amazon?
I'm glad to catch up.
Yeah.
We'll have a full discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Let me close the panel and say thank you very much for being a part of the audience. I hope that you will take this back to your communities, and let's keep the full employment fight going. Congressman Conyers, do you have a last word?
Last word is get your congressman on my bill. HR 1000. And Elizabeth, the new senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, is one of the co-sponsors as well. And I want to thank you all. I want to thank all the panelists. I got as much out of this as anybody here, maybe more. Thank you all.
Aha, okay. So we have a couple of brief questions from the audience that we were able to take, and I'm told that there will be a discussion, a brief presentation on the Detroit water crisis in Flint, Michigan immediately after this. The gentleman over here.
I'm Ken McCraley. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm in the construction industry, and I own a construction-related company that hires or has about 30 employees. 95% of them is African Americans. And what I see is legislation that comes down, at least around the construction industry, that has to do with highway and bridge work, because obviously the Department of Transportation has a lot of money. And then what happens is they try to make it a Jobs Act as well. So they hire a lot of minorities and in those jobs who don't qualify. But what happens is the union or the municipality ends up changing the qualification just to get those folks in, and then those jobs are gone. And so that's one of the, the jobs that we, the stimulus that we put together, we end up losing them. And then the other thing is private industry. The gentleman from Amazon, you bring up good points, but just in our particular Minneapolis area, there's a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, right? And those are the folks who are the movers and shakers who can buy a half a city block and employ folks. But what happens is we don't know what their employment goals are, right? And what can happen is whatever legislature can actually come up with and say, if we put $1 of federal funds in there, we want to know what you hire.
I really don't want to interrupt you, but can you just quickly get to the question?
The question, the question is this, right? Is when we're creating these job programs, we really have to look at how long those folks are being hired for. That's never looked at. It's that our success is we hired XYZ minority and women contractors or people, but you look down the line and no one looks 2 years, 5 years. Those folks aren't working at those jobs. We're in another recession. They're the first to go.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to talk about how we address that issue of longevity and making sure that we're putting people in a permanent place in the street?
If we view job programs as training programs and judge their success by what happens to the participants after they leave the program, we are not going to have any effect on the unemployment problem. If the problem is a lack of jobs, a job gap, job programs have to be conceived not as a training program to move people into jobs because they don't have what it takes, but as a means of creating the jobs to fill the job gap. They have to be jobs that persist. That doesn't mean that they have to be permanent jobs for the individuals who occupy them, but the positions have to be permanent so that in terms of the people who cycle through them, there will always be the additional employment opportunities created. They can't go away. It's not a temporary fix. It's the permanent need to fill the job gap that's got to drive the program.
Well, since you've got the...
Thanks.
Mike, but be real brief.
I'll
I want to
be
see if I can squeeze in...
Okay, I'm just going to, simply footnotes. Full employment with benefits you need to talk about. And right to work is very confusing because right now, for example, in Virginia, we have to vote no on that amendment because right to work often references anti-union stuff, right to work for less. And I just wanted to say that as a union president or my career in the union, that we also have done similar programs to what Amazon has done within the union context.
Okay. Hand that mic to the person behind you. Anyone want to comment from the panel? Okay.
The only thing, can I just say?
Sure.
I mean, the only thing I would say is full employment with benefits, right? And I think that full employment means that workers will be in a better position to bargain for better conditions, and that can go beyond even the traditional benefits that we think about. So.
I'll just throw a quick line. We should never let them get away with right to work. What they're talking about is denying freedom of contract.
And historically, it was progressives that we should blame for letting conservatives steal the slogan. The right to work slogan was a slogan promoted by FDR as a means of achieving what we now call full employment. Progressives let the use of the term lapse, and conservatives says, oh, goody, we'll take it over, and they didn't. We let them get away with it. We got to take it back from them.
Okay. Please be brief.
I came in the back end of the conversation, so I just want to know, what are the keys to succeeding on Amazon? I did recently started an open an
just
account.
speak directly into the mic.
I did recently open an account, a seller's account, and I started on professional, but then I wasn't getting a lot of traffic, so I downgraded to the individual subscription. So I just want to know what is the key in succeeding on Amazon.
I'm glad to catch up.
Yeah.
We'll have a full discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Let me close the panel and say thank you very much for being a part of the audience. I hope that you will take this back to your communities and let's keep the full employment fight going. Congressman Conyers, do you have a last word?
Last word is get your congressman on my bill. HR 1000, and Elizabeth, the new senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, is one of the co-sponsors as well. And I want to thank you all. I want to thank all the panelists. I got as much out of this as anybody here, maybe more. Thank you all.